this painting by mixing up alizarin crimson and raw sienna. What this is going to create is going to create a way for me to loosen up the paper by covering almost the entire paper with this mixture, except for where there may be like one place where a bright white cloud might be. Also down towards the bottom where the ground might be and also the horizon line, we want to leave that open as well. Now I'm mixing up ultramarine and cobalt to create a nice blue of the sky. I'm getting ready to paint the negative space where the sky would be, and I'm going to look at that resource photo and see where some of those spots might happen to be in my composition. Looking at our resource photo, we can see that there are clouds that are up towards the top that are larger, and then as they go back in the distance, they're going to get smaller and also more horizontal looking. So I'm taking that light blue and I'm painting in where the sky is. But I don't have to get it exactly the way that the photo is. Again, that photo is a resource. As I'm painting, I'm softening the edges by taking my brush, washing it off, and then drying it a bit with a paper towel, and also kind of going around those places where those rough places would be. Also notice how I'm holding my brush. For a majority of this painting, I'm going to hold my brush sideways, and sometimes I even hold it in a different manner with my thumb on the top and the fingers on the bottom, sideways, so it'll be easier for me to do some dry brushing. Continue my work with the blue. Now I'm working on some horizontal blues coming across where those clouds that are in the distance would be. As we're working on the clouds, we want to think about how they're going to become more three-dimensional on a flat surface. I'm going to use those three tones. I'm going to use this lighter value that we just made, and then a mid-tone, which will be for the sides of the clouds, and then of course a very dark blue, which will be for the shadows. Now I'm kind of coming in with a mid-tone, kind of working in with the side, again looking at my resource photos to see where they are. Also notice how, once again, how I'm holding that brush sideways and just very lightly brushing that on and then scrubbing back and forth in the places where I need to soften. You will have some areas where you're going to have sharp edges, you're going to have some softer edges, and then you're going to have some very soft edges when this is complete. Earlier, you may have seen me take my water bottle and just spritz a little bit. That's because the paper was starting to get a little dry. Now I had taken that mixture that I used earlier of the raw sienna and the alizarin crimson, and I'm going to start putting in that mid-tone on the side, kind of like there was a little bit of shadow. And again, looking at my resource photo, I can see where some of those might be on the cloud. So it would be the side of the cloud, creating that little bit of a shadow that takes place there. Now we're not working really dark, and we're using a little bit of it's almost a brown color, but it's so light that it's still going to create that shadow, but it's not going to make it jump off the paper yet. We haven't developed all those contrasts that we want. Once again, you can see how I'm holding my brush, the four fingers on the top, a thumb on the bottom, and this helps do that dry brushing effect that's really going to help create the cloud appearance. The main thing with this is, once again, you're not reproducing that photo, but you're having fun with the paint. You're seeing how you can develop those clouds and how you can create them looking more three-dimensional by using those three tones. Now I've mixed up a darker blue, and I'm coming back in where the sky is. I'm looking at that resource photo once again and emphasizing those sections. Because as we know, as something dries, as the watercolor dries, it's going to become lighter. So I'm going to come back in and emphasize some of those spots one more time. Watercolor is all about layering. In this specific situation, you're going to have lots of layering. Starting out with that light, very, very light color that we did first. Then a very light blue on top of that. And now we're gradually getting darker as we're going forward. Now I've mixed up an even darker blue. And you can see some of the granulation that's taking place because the paper is wet of that mixture of cobalt and ultramarine. And you can also see how holding my brush sideways forces me to do some brush strokes in there where it's dry brushing. However, that section just happened to be too dry, so I brought up my mister and just mist it a little bit. Now notice when I added water to it, I didn't try to spray it so hard that it got completely wet. What I was doing was I was wetting down just that one place so that the granulation would take place and so that it would soften those edges because the edges were very, very rough. Now I'm mixing up all four of the colors. I started out with the ultramarine and I added a little bit of cobalt to it, and now we're adding also some raw sienna and then some alizarin crimson. For this one, we're kind of creating a gray. This is going to start working with the darker shadows. And it still looks kind of blue, so I'm going to add a little bit more of the raw sienna, and that should help tone it down and make it more of a gray. And with this one, it's especially important that you hold that paintbrush sideways. Again, 4 fingers on the top and thumb on the bottom, doing dry brushing. And that's going to help give the texture or the illusion of those clouds being fluffy. Again, a little bit of spritz because it's getting too hard. The edges are just a little bit too rough. And so spritzing it just a little bit helps soften that area. You can start to see how the colors that we're building up layer by layer are starting to make these clouds look three-dimensional because they have that light color first and then the mid-tone on the sides that we used and now this darker shadow towards the bottom. I think creating the smaller clouds that go horizontally is my favorite part of the painting. I'm taking my brush sideways, just a little bit damp, it's not too wet, and I'm softening those edges just by rubbing on them. Now I made a thicker version of that same color, mixing all 4 together, and this is where I'm going to get our dark. Putting towards the bottom, that shadow that's on the bottom of the clouds. Again, holding my brush, 4 fingers on the top, thumb on the bottom, and dry brushing it as you come across. Being aware that these are not storm clouds. We want them to be fluffy and light, like the sun is shining on them. And that's one of the reasons why we use the lighter color at first, to kind of get a little bit of yellow in there. I'm coming in and putting in some color in the bottom just to kind of make it look like some mountains from the background. And then working with some of the colors to create the foreground. In your foreground, using a light color dark color to build up that texture that's in that foreground and to add some interest. And I also come in with a little bit of green that I've mixed up. And this would be different for everybody's painting, so depending on what your photograph is, and depends on what you want to put down there. But this would be one way of doing it. And this is what the final painting looks like.